It's September 25th, 2024, 5:30 p.m. We'll start the meeting with a report from the chair and vice chair. So I'm the new chair of the Salt Lake City Planning Commission. Welcome to this meeting. I'm a little nervous, so. Does the vice chair have anything to report?
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have the report of the director, and Michaela Octay is the deputy director of the planning department.
Just happy to be here. That's
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now it's time for the open forum, where the commissioners can discuss planning, zoning, and general land use items that are not listed on the agenda. This is a 10-minute period if we need that much time, and does not include a public hearing.
We may not want to address it tonight, but at our last meeting, we did, seemed like we had some issues over the fact that certain land uses are prohibited within a certain radius of certain residential zones, but not all residential zones. So we may want to revisit that at a future time.
Great. I know that Nick Norris, the planning director, is aware of that issue and is working on it for us too. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Now it's time to talk about the consent agenda items. We have 3 items on our consent agenda today. The first is plan development for El Centro at approximately 155 South, 600 West. That's case number PLN PCM 2024-00814. The second item on the consent agenda is design review for Alta North Station Apartments at approximately 1865 West, North Temple, which is case number PLN PCM 2024-00115. And we also have approval of the meeting minutes from the August 28th, 24 Planning Commission meeting. I'm going to open a public hearing to cover all the items listed on the consent agenda. So if you want to make a public comment on one of those 3 items I just introduced, you can go up to the podium and make your comment. You have 5 minutes if you're a member or a representative from a recognized community organization, or 2 minutes as a member of the community. I don't see any commenters. Do we have anything new on emails? Thank you. I'm going to close the public hearing on those 3 consent agenda items. And now I'll ask for a motion or discussion. A motion, actually.
I'd like to make a motion to pass the consent agenda.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Christensen.
I'll second.
I have a second from Commissioner Krasik. And we'll vote. Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik.
Yes.
And I will also vote yes. So that's 6 votes yes and no votes. No votes. So that passes unanimously. Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is some unfinished business from a previous meeting in June of 23. This item is the alley vacation at approximately 268 West Paxton Avenue. It's case number PLN PCM 2022-01128. The planner is Olivia Svetko.
Sorry, Madam Chair, that case number didn't match the memorandum in the staff report. Are those different?
I read it from the agenda. Let's see.
Here's the memorandum.
The number should be PLN PCM 2022-01128.
So the case number in the staff report is incorrect?
I apologize. Yes, it should be correct in the noticing, I believe.
Okay.
My apologies. All right. Okay. Yes, as Commissioner Burrows mentioned, this is coming back to commission. This is a petition to amend or to vacate an alley near Paxton Avenue between 1161 South and 300 West and 268 Paxton Avenue. This originally came before the commission on June 14th of 2023. I will start off with a quick recap of the previous petition, which was to vacate just this red dashed portion of the alley that you see up on the screen. It was due to a property owner wanted to vacate this and close it off. There are gates existing closing that portion of the alley off now, and access, the two properties that were using the alley for access were accessing off the property to the north from 300 West. This was tabled because the vacation of the red portion created kind of a landlocked alley with no legal access, and because of that, a couple of property owners were not in support. Today, the amended petition is to vacate the entire alley and replace this with an access easement from 300 West across the property to the north and into that east-west portion of the alley. This solves both of those issues. It protects legal access to the remaining portion of the alley for the property owners that are using it to access their property. And all of the involved property owners have signed in favor of this petition. This amended petition does meet the standards of approval, which state that an alley vacation is supported when granting the petition will not deny sole access or required off-street parking to any property adjacent to the alley, and granting the petition will not result in any property being landlocked. Because of this, based on the information and findings in this report, staff recommends that Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to City Council for the proposed alley vacation.
Thank you. Does the applicant have a presentation or?
I believe Ryan is here to give a little bit of information.
You have 10 minutes up here. Yeah, you have 10 minutes if you need that.
Okay, and this is your
And tell us
petition.
your name.
Scroll through.
My name is Ryan Bushman. Actually, my attorney, Ryan Merriman, is not here at the moment, but I can kind of speak to what our petition is. So we have worked to have an easement made from, or reassigned from Third West to come into the access so that the access can come right off of Third West, and then we've had all the property owners in agreement that this would change and be, the easement would actually be done away with as an actual public easement. So everyone is in favor of it. I've spoken with all of the property owners about it. We all would like to do this due to issues that we're having with the homeless setting up camps in this easement. It's just become a problematic area, and so it is our hope that we can, as landowners, be able to deal with that in a way that helps to ease that burden from all of us. But yeah, everyone is in support of it, and And we've got access for everyone along that easement to be able to still get to their property in this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Bushman. Do any commissioners have any clarifying questions about what's been presented? And remember, we're not discussing the merits of the proposal or our opinions until after public
I do.
comment.
So does Third West, where you're going to extend the easement, does that have a curb cut already, an existing curb cut?
So currently, that is an access to property where Romaine Electric currently resides, and it's an access that comes through the parking lot right to that current easement. That is the current way that most people access that anyways.
I'm just asking if it has a current curb cut if people get in.
Yes, it most definitely
That's
does.
all I really needed to know.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it would require no change at all.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you. I will open the public hearing on this item. There's not a public hearing, I'm sorry. We closed the public hearing last time we heard this in 2023, so I'm sorry. Now it's time for a commission discussion. If you have. I think it's okay. Yeah. Is there any discussion or someone want to make a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
Based on the information presented in the discussion, I move that the commission forward a recommendation to adopt this alley vacation to the City Council.
I'll second that.
There's a motion by Commissioner Scheer and a second by Commissioner Christensen. Any discussion to the motion? Okay, let's vote. Commissioner Krasik,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
and I will also vote yes. So that's a recommendation to the City Council, a positive recommendation to adopt that alley vacation unanimously, 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're on to the regular agenda for today. The first item on our regular agenda is a zoning text amendment to allow 6-foot fences in the front yard setback in the M1 zoning district of the Salt Lake City International Center. The case number is PLN PCM 2024-00800, and the planner is Diana Martinez.
Good evening. So this is a zoning text amendment. It is a private applicant that has initiated this amendment. It is not a city-initiated amendment. The applicant requests an amendment to allow a maximum fence height of 6 feet in the front yard setback, which by ordinance we call between the front property line and the primary facade of the principal structure. And this will be in the M1 zones, which is the light manufacturing zoning district within the Salt Lake City International Center. Just to let you know that we will be adding a section to the amendment defining the Salt Lake City International City, because we did not have one in our ordinance before. So the boundaries will be that the boundaries are west of 4000 West, north of I-80, properties east of John Glenn Drive, including properties that front on John Glenn Drive on both the east and the west sides of said drive, and south of John Cannon Drive, including properties that front on John Cannon Drive on both the north and south sides of said drive. Based on the findings listed in the staff report and the standards for zoning text amendments, the planning staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council regarding this proposal. This is the site that the applicant has initiated the need for the text amendment. It is Delta Airlines. They are putting in a training facility and they want security and therefore needing a 6-foot fence in their front yard setback. This is what the proposed text amendment change will look like. Really, the applicant had come in with one proposal. In working with the city attorney's office and the applicant, we've changed it to where it would just modify number 4 to where it would add what's in the blue, M1 zoned properties in the Salt Lake International Center. And then staff and the city attorney's office worked together to establish the definition of the Salt Lake City International Center. And again, we are recommending that you recommend favorably to the city council to approve this. Thank you.
Thank you. If the applicant wants to make a presentation, you
We
can
don't
come
have
up
a
to the table
presentation,
now.
but I think they're ready
Or if
for
you-
answer or questions.
Come on up to the table. You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Greg Beecher.
Great.
I work for MHT Architects, and we're working on this Delta project. The fencing issue came up late in the project after we'd already started the building. They hadn't planned on a fence to begin with. And so as we started studying the ordinance, we realized you could only have a 4-foot fence, which does not allow them to have much security to the building. And finding out that other properties around the area have had issues with thefts and things during the day, it was very concerning to them. So we put in for the text amendment to allow us to have a 6-foot fence.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Beecher. Do any commissioners have any clarifying questions for the planner or the applicant?
I do. So Diana, under the ordinance, they could have a 6-foot tall tent fence starting at the primary building along that line, correct?
Correct. So they can actually have it on their side yard and their rear. They just have it within that front property line.
Right. So I'm wondering why that wouldn't be sufficient, Mr. Beecher, for security. You can have a 6-foot tall tent, it's just not at your front property line.
Right, and I don't know if you recall the picture that was up, the photograph, the actual front of the building is along Amelia Earhart, and so that would put just a 4-foot fence out in front of the building, which is where all the parking is, and all of the access to the building. And in this building, they have millions of dollars worth of flight simulators where they're training the pilots to fly different aircraft. And so putting a 4-foot fence out there does not really provide any security to the building or the parking area itself.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question for staff. Do we have specific guidelines for fences, for front fences in terms of materials, construction, and so forth? Visibility?
We do. In the M1, it doesn't, it can be a solid one, it can be a chain link. Most of the fencing in this area is wrought iron or like a upgraded chain link. There's not really any solid fences in the International Center. So I think that has kind of dictated what has been used, is just most people have used those.
But a solid fence would be allowed.
The solid fence would be
So an
allowed.
8-foot solid fence would be allowed.
Up to 6 feet.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry, 6 foot.
The applicant is proposing a wrought iron.
Okay,
So,
all right. But that doesn't mean that anybody else couldn't come along. And why are we extending this to the whole zone, to
because,
that whole area?
good question, because it is a private application, therefore we couldn't really expand it citywide. I think at some point, planning staff will do that. There's a few other changes in that ordinance that we'd like to look at. So I think we're going to do it as a whole, but later, because this was a private application, we're trying to get it through.
So
this time.
so you're thinking about doing it for the whole M1 zone? Is that what you're saying?
We are at some point, yes.
That's kind of like I should. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you. Now, I'll open the public hearing on this item. If anyone wishes to speak on this item, you can approach the microphone. You have 5 minutes or 2 minutes.
And just to note, we had no opposition to this. We only had one call in favor, so I don't expect anyone.
Thank you. Anything new? Thank you. I'm going to close the public hearing, and the commission can now have a discussion. If anyone has anything to say or wants to make a motion.
I guess just like I want to just check in a little bit. May I talk to Diana just one more time? Just kind of like the main concern is safety of these properties. Do we kind of know any kind of statistics about what kind of a safety increase happens from 4 foot to 6 foot? Is that knowledge that you have?
So I don't have that statistic. However, on the last page of your staff report, we did ask the police department for a review, and they did note that there is a lot of criminal activity out in that area, and that a 6 foot, believe it or not, that 2 feet would actually give a little bit more deterrent and protection to the properties.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So I did notice that the fire department had very specific requirements about gates and so forth. And so is that something that happens happens during the, when would that be reviewed by the fire department? During the building permit or
Yes.
for the fence?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. Madam Chair, I can make a motion.
Thank you.
Based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the commission forward a recommendation to adopt this text amendment to the city council.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Scheer and a second from Commissioner Scott. Any discussion? Okay. Commissioner Berry,
No.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
I'm going to vote yes. Commissioner Scott?
Yes.
So that passes with a vote of 5-1. So that's a legislative item. We send our recommendation to the city council, who will have another public hearing and vote on it ultimately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
The next item on our regular agenda is the development agreement for Intermountain Health at approximately 700 to 800 South in State Street to Main Street. This case number is PLN PCM 2022-01109. The planner is Amanda Roman.
All right, thank you. We're moving quick tonight. I'm here to present the development agreement between the city and Intermountain Health. This is a legislative item, so you'll make a recommendation and I'll move forward to the city council. The city council is planning on a public hearing on the item next Tuesday, so we'll be turning the transmittal around tomorrow. Quick project background. So the original request from 2022 was to rezone the property between 700 and 800 South State Street in Maine from D2, which is our downtown support district, to D1, the central business district. The Sears site property includes 10 parcels and is approximately 9 acres. And if the amendment is approved, the property owner intends to build an urban hospital on it, as you are aware. In March of 2023, the Planning Commission forwarded a positive recommendation to the City Council to adopt the proposed zoning changes. The commission also forwarded a positive recommendation for the proposed text amendment, which would allow hospitals and their accessory uses in the D1 zone. The original proposal had requested these uses be permitted, and the commission made a recommendation to change those to conditional uses, and I believe that that's how the city council intends to move forward. That hasn't been part of this discussion. So the applicant, Intermountain Health, has been working with the city council after they identified their desire to have to adopt a development agreement for the property. The primary concern was related to the ground floor activation, specifically along State Street and Main Street. The D1 zone has a 90% ground floor use activation requirement, which would be incredibly hard for a hospital use to meet. That being said, it's really important for the community and the council to activate these two primary streets to the best of the ability for the intended use. The Planning Commission needs to make a recommendation on the development agreement because they are proposing to reduce the standards in the D1 zone. And so that they need to move forward with a recommendation. And that's why that's here today. In the staff report, there was 7 different considerations that I want to just speak to quickly before I go into the proposed development agreement. So the first one was ground floor activation. I want to point out that the percentages were intended to be changed, so they didn't match what was in the development agreement. So disregard those. I believe that was talked about in your pre-meeting, but I just wanted to point those out that we clarified with the applicant what those percentages were, and the staff report just wasn't updated to reflect that. So staff considered ground floor activation. The applicant is proposing a food truck park along State Street, mid-block walkway connections, open space. They are proposing to set aside at a minimum of 1 acre of open space to be connected via mid-block walkways to State Street, 700 South, and Main Street, not 800 South. 800 South is where the ambulance entrance will be, and so that has a different condition tied to it. Staff also considered the street-facing facade length of hospitals, proposed parking, and vehicle access points, which is all discussed in your staff report. Here's a diagram. The applicant also has a presentation, and they can go into more of the details, but the proposed activation on State Street is 79% of the frontage. This would include the food truck area, which is proposed to be 150 feet of that of the street width. Linear, they're measuring in linear feet. So when you include the food truck park, which would be open year round, that activation is 79%, which is a reduction from the 90. 800 South is proposed to have 60% activation. This is slightly reduced. This is reduced based on the ambulance entrances. The proposed entrance is probably going to be about 100 feet in width, the driveway, so that takes away a lot of that frontage. Main Street is proposed to have 70% activation, and 700 South is the least amount of activation with 50%. The applicant is proposing potentially a parking structure there, or the parking structure may be located across on Main Street. That's to be decided. And so that's not included in this report. So staff is recommending adopting the development agreement as written. And then I will go through a couple other considerations that may want to be considered moving forward. So the development agreement states that as long as the property is used as a hospital and its accessory uses, the ground floor uses of the building cannot be less than what I just previously shown. And those include uses that we do not typically define as active uses, including the food truck park and some other hospital-related uses that we wouldn't consider active when you're looking at a mixed-use development or what we typically see. But we are counting those because they will bring people in and they will activate the street more than a blank building facade. The second point under the primary development agreement is that the developer shall provide a minimum of 1 acre of landscaped open area, with mid-block walkways providing access to at least 3 public streets, and include a minimum of 33% vegetation. There's an alternative condition I'll speak to in a second that just adds on to this, but the 3 mid-block walkways would access State, 700 South, and Main Street. The food truck park along State Street must be a minimum of 150 linear feet in width and include electric hookups, seating, shade canopy, and street trees. And then public restrooms need to be made available during regular business hours. And the fourth part of this is that the hospital is not subject to the maximum street-facing building facade length. A few weeks ago, I brought to you the proposed changes to the design review chapter where we are proposing to limit street-facing facade lengths. And we have called out a few exceptions for different types of buildings, like elementary schools or conference centers, and the hospital kind of falls into that that exception based on the use and how big these buildings have to be. And just as a point, all of the hospitals in this region are well over 250 feet in length. The second part of the development agreement states that if the property is not used as a hospital, they decide to go a different direction, then the property, any development on the property would need to comply with the ground floor use regulation of 90% of the D1 zone, and then it would also need to meet the maximum street-facing facade length. The third section of the development agreement states that the developer shall provide pedestrian access through the block via the routes shown on the exhibit. They don't need to be exact, but they do need to provide access to those 3 main streets, and that would be recorded with the city and with the Salt Lake County's Recorder's Office. The fourth part of the agreement states that all of the active ground floor uses must have direct access to the sidewalk or a public or the mid-block walkway through doors that are open during business hours, just to maintain that flow and increase pedestrian activity. And then here are the other items to consider either adding or adjusting with the development agreement based on staff's review. And so number 6 in the staff report, it really just expands on the already agreed upon requirement for open space. The recommendation would be to have more tree canopy coverage. In the staff recommendation, the staff report, staff recommended putting a signal protected pedestrian crossing as a condition. We no longer recommend that. And that is because, not because we don't support it, but because there's more processes that would need to go through if they do ultimately want to do a detached parking structure on a different piece of property. The reason that this was put in the staff report is because the original rendering showed a sky bridge, but in order to do a sky bridge, there's more processes to get those air rights, and then that would need to go back through commission and council to do any kind of vacation. So, and then additionally, if the parking structure is across the street, they'll be working with planning and transportation. So transportation will review the plans and require any kind of crosswalks or signals at that time. So we're no longer proposing that element of condition number 6. What I would like you to consider is adding number 7, and this is because staff identified a conflict with the proposal for the 100-foot driveway. That exceeds the maximum driveway width in the D1 zone, which is 30 feet. So if that's not included in the development agreement, then the applicant would need to come and ask for plan development review with their development proposal, which is just another petition, which may not be necessary. So we do recommend adding authorization for the wider driveway widths within the development agreement. So based on the information presented in the staff report, Staff is recommending that the commission forward a positive recommendation to adopt the development agreement as presented in attachment B, and then consider the additional additions that were listed in the staff report. And as I mentioned, number 6 was just an expansion of the already agreed upon open space with the, but we deleted the pedestrian crossing since that'll be reviewed separately as a part of any redevelopment. And then we do recommend adding authorization for driveway widths. And then the 8th condition would just be that any development would need to comply with all other applicable regulations that are not found in the development agreement, or be authorized through the design review process, which we expect the applicant will need to apply for. So the next steps, so next week this will go before the city council. The city council will make a decision whether to adopt the zone change, the text amendment, and the development agreement that accompanies them. And then when the applicant is ready to develop the property, we expect if the building is over 200 feet, they will need to submit a design review petition. That will come forward to the Planning Commission, and you all will review and approve that. It is not a legislative process, so it'll end at the Planning Commission. And that is what I have here. The applicant is here, and I'm also available to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. The applicant can join the table and state your name
Let me pull up
before
their-
your presentation, and then you have up to 10 minutes. Although remember, we've seen the staff report and
Sure. We will be brief. Amanda, thank you. Did a great job. Mostly want to be able to answer any questions that you may have.
I'm sorry, can you please be closer to the microphone and also state your name for the record?
So my name is Bentley Pay with Intermountain Health, oversee our real estate projects for the system.
Hi, my name is Heather Wall, and I am the LDS Hospital President.
So Amanda covered most of the things that we would have otherwise talked about. As she mentioned, almost 18 months ago, we were here before the Planning Commission. That received a favorable recommendation to move forward. Since that time, a lot of work has gone into the development agreement that is being presented tonight. A lot of conversations, meetings with city leaders, staff, community, business leaders, to reach a point that's really a compromise between, from the very beginning, Intermountain acknowledged that this would be a different hospital than anything we've ever built. It's on 9 acres instead of 40 or 50 or 70 acres. So we had always envisioned that this would have to be a different kind of project. And certainly have had a lot of conversations to get feedback around street activation, open space, walkways, the 3 primary concerns that have been expressed to us. At the same time, balancing that with still needing a functional hospital that allows us to effectively care for our patients. And so that back and forth over the last 18 months and the compromises and negotiations is what has resulted in the development agreement that is back here before the Planning Commission. And really, throughout the whole process, we haven't heard a lot of concerns about the actual upzone to a D1 or the height or having the hospital as a permitted use. It's really been focused on how do we ensure that Intermountain will do what it says it will do. And that's how we ended up with the suggestion from City Council to put this into a development agreement. Intermountain is comfortable moving forward with the compromises that have been made on the primary focus points here. Again, activation, the walkways, and the open space. We're excited to bring something amazing to the city and hope that we get the support here tonight to finally move this forward. Heather, anything else that you want to add?
Bentley mentioned that we have, by design, engaged with a lot of our community members. So met with the business groups that are downtown, spent some active time listening to the city community council chairs to make sure that what we were putting forward would meet the community engagement need of the downtown area, while, to Bentley's point, assuring we had the ability to serve the need of 2,000 individuals that we expect to be coming down to the Square City block, and patients, families, and staff that will be at the hospital. And so a lot of time, effort, and energy has been put into assuring we've got a thoughtful process for meeting those 2 needs, making sure that the community's needs are being met and that we can have a wonderful gift to the community in the hospital that will be very functional in that Square City block.
thank you. Do any commissioners have any clarifying questions?
I have one for staff. So does this development agreement does not change the D1 zone at all?
No, it does not.
Okay.
And I have a question for staff too, that a parking structure is not included in this, in the property description or in this development agreement.
No, it is not.
Thank you.
Yeah. I
Any
have
other
one- I'm sorry.
questions?
Yeah, I have one more, Madam Chair, sorry. So where's the front door?
So what you see right here in front of you is a stacking diagram. We have not started design, but when you look at what you see ahead of you, the front door of the hospital itself is going to be inside that Square City block to the south portion, so directly north of that 8 South area within that L-shaped Square City block. If you're looking to get into the medical office building, so that's going to be most of the clinics, that is that northwest corner that will be the entrance to our medical office buildings.
Okay, so you're saying it'll be on 800 South?
No, my apologies. It'll be on the inside of that. So where the L is, the entrance to the. Sorry, let me. Trying to figure out how to show you.
Sorry, I see an H.
Here we go. Okay, so you'll see the green space on this area.
Yes.
In the stacking diagram, which again, remember, this is not the design
We
process.
understand it's diagrammatic,
Got it.
but it's
Okay.
an important point.
Yep. Okay. So it is directly south of that triangle where you see the green space inside the Square City block.
So it'll be on the inside
Correct.
of the block. So it'll be surrounded by buildings, like mostly. It won't have a street
It'll be
presence.
inside the L. Correct. The
Okay.
main entrance to the hospital will be inside that area.
So when we, if we walked around the block, we would not see an entrance to the hospital.
You would see the entrance to the medical group clinics, and all of those blue spaces that you see up there would be community activated areas that would have entrances into them, so that whether that be a conference center, whether that be a pharmacy.
I understand that there would be entrances into those spaces.
Yes.
But if I walked to the hospital,
Yes.
I would not be able to find the entrance to the hospital on the outside.
You would be able to find the entrance to the proposed emergency room, which is that most east-south corner. So that would be the emergency room entrance. The medical group, medical office building would be the opposite corner, entrance to the hospital inside both.
So if you want to be dropped off by somebody, is
Yeah.
that where you'd be dropped off?
Again, it depends on what service you're coming to the hospital for.
Okay.
For an inpatient visit, that would be coming in from that 7th South entrance or potentially that 8th South drivability entrance, and you would be dropped off inside the Square City block.
So the 7th South entrance is, at this point, it's a drive, it's not, okay.
Correct.
All
Yeah.
right, so, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Let's move to the public hearing. So I'll open the public hearing. If anyone wants to make a comment about this item, you can approach the microphone and make a comment. I don't see anyone. We have received a comment from the recognized community organization, which is in the staff report.
The community council would like that read into the record as well.
I mean, I would argue it's in the record. It's in the staff report, it's in the record. And we read it and everyone has access to it, it's public. So I don't see the redundant need for that, personally.
I feel like that's sufficient too, that do all the commissioners see that letter from ELPCO? Is that okay? Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna close the public hearing. And now it's time for the commission's discussion or to make a motion.
I have one question real quick. I imagine this is not applicable, but it just occurred to me. If there's like a hospital, like chapel or whatever, doesn't count as a church in terms of proximity for the like 600-foot radius things of bars and restaurants and things like that, right?
Generally, those types of spacing requirements are when an alcohol use wants to come into proximity with a community use. So in this case, it would be, it wouldn't be applicable because it's if there is a chapel, it would be going within proximity of an alcohol use. Is there one? I'm not sure.
Just along State Street there, yeah, but that's.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be an issue for
Cool.
for that use. It's the other way around. It's a one-way street.
But just to be clear, it would be a problem for future establishments, right?
Potentially, if that's still the state law, yes.
I'm going to recognize Commissioner Berry. Okay, I have a clarifying question. The language in the development agreement would exempt them from design review or like doing a plan development because of their wide driveways, right? That's one thing we want to include in the development agreement, so they don't have to come back for that.
Yes, it's not in the development agreement. Staff is recommending to add that. So
Okay.
So they don't have to add a plan development to what we expect will be a design review petition just for driveway width, since expected,
Yeah.
just to have a wide driveway to serve the
And it exempts
facility.
them from design review for the length of the facade and also any limits on the length of the facade?
It would.
Okay.
Yes.
Would design review be required for any other exceptions than those two?
Yes. So the development agreement covers the building length. If you add the driveway, it would cover the driveway, and it would cover the uses that are being proposed. It does not cover the building height. So we expect that they will come through design review regardless if the hospital exceeds 200 feet in height. It does not cover glass or building entrances, any of those other standards, but those can be modified through the design review process still.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Berry?
Commissioner, let me walk back what I said just a minute ago. I'm not sure. Some of you see me, some of you remember me from a long time ago. I'm a little rusty on land use. That's okay. As far as the proximity between a religious use or a community use and an alcohol establishment, that would have to be a decision that I guess the zoning administrator or their designee makes at the time, but it may not be that a hospital itself with an accessory chapel or religious use may qualify as one of those community uses.
Okay.
So I think that's just something that's going to have to be discussed if that happens, when that moment comes. But
Yeah, that makes more sense. It would be an accessory use,
right?
Not like a primary of any kind.
If there were like a separate chapel on the site, then that where that is a specific principal use as opposed to something that's incidental to the hospital use.
Okay, cool.
So I have a comment regarding the transparency of the street frontages. So one of the recommendations it seems we made initially was that those remain transparent, and that's not in there. But I feel like what potentially could happen if we don't highlight that in the development agreement as a condition is all of those windows and transparent areas could be covered up. And we see that happen a lot. And so I would like to avoid that. And to the other commissioners, I would, maybe consider adding that into another part of the recommendation to the city council to relook at transparency of the windows along the street frontages. So we have open doors during business hours, but that we don't have. Because the activation uses are unique to this, I can see them wanting to cover them for a lot of things. So we've got, an art therapy space, a clinic reception, those Instacare reception, blah, blah, blah. Like those things I could conceivably see them wanting to block out. And if we're making, those are typically not what we would consider as activation uses, but they will be for this instance. I think that's fine, but we should try to ensure that they remain transparent so they are an active use to the street frontages.
I recognize that same thing in your recommendation number 3 in the staff report. It says the conference center may count as an active ground floor use provided the lobby of the conference center is accessible to the street and the windows are transparent and provide unblocked visibility into the lobby. That's in the staff report, but it's not in the development agreement. And I feel like that language may be about a lot of those things that are going to count as active uses. That language would be helpful in the development agreement.
Yeah, I remember reading that, and one of the issues I had with it was that they were transparent to the lobby and not the street. And I think that's what we need to clarify.
So with this recommendation, it's the points 1 through 5 are reiterating what was in the development agreement, just with a little bit more details. So if you'd like to, make a recommendation to add specific language, we can do that. Other than number 2 and the A through E, which disregard, that was supposed to be deleted. This just kind of goes into more details on what that can look like.
I do think we should look at transparency as an issue with some of these things, because just because they have a use doesn't mean, the D1 zone requires active uses. Does it require transparency? It does require quite a bit of glass on the ground floor, right?
It does.
Yeah, but it doesn't say it can't be like glass block or, it can't be translucent or, glaze, some kind of other smoky glazing or something like that, right?
We have standards related to like reflective glass.
Okay, so we do have a standard for that in the D1. Okay, good. So we don't need to make one. Thank you. I would like to say thank you. Thank you for considering doing a downtown hospital. Thank you for really listening to the community about the activation of uses around the edges. Thank you for being creative about that. And I know a hospital is a difficult land use to squeeze on a 10-acre block or 9 acres. And I think we all appreciate having that option, especially in this neighborhood. And I think it's going to be a really tremendous addition to the community. I am going to, and this is something that will probably have to come up for a design review, is the entrances, because entrances are something that's that is part of the D1 zone. They have to be entrances, and it's not clear to me that having entrances to a drugstore and entrances to a clinic counts as an entrance to this use. So, and I don't like the idea. One of the things that's so annoying about hospitals is you can't find your way around. And if we don't have any street presence of where the front door is, it doesn't have to be on the street, but we need to have some presence for it. So perhaps one of these walkways, would indicate, okay, not with a sign, but with design, that the way into this building, the way into the hospital, if you're going to visit a friend, if you're going to go to, one of the ambulatory clinics, that this is how you enter the building. And I think sort of burying it inside the square might be okay. It often depends on how you have a relationship with your parking, where your parking is and how you have, because that's obviously, and drop off, because there's a lot of drop off and pick up in a hospital. So all of those things are important. And I think that it just needs to be a very important part of how you consider going forward on the specific design of this project. And I would really encourage you to make it very obvious on the street, on 2 streets even, how you get into this building.
I want to remind us that our options in this case, this is a kind of a legislative item where we're making a recommendation to approve the development agreement the way that it was presented. We can make a recommendation to approve it with some changes, and specifically note that some of the changes that are recommended in the staff report are not in the development agreement, so we need to add those. We can recommend to deny this approval, deny recommendation, or we can vote to table it. However, it's scheduled for a hearing next week, so tabling it would be ineffective, I think. We don't have more time.
Amanda, can you put those conditions back up again? The additional conditions that you're...
Yes. And then also note, our motion sheet includes some language to include some of those suggestions. I'll note it doesn't include the language that we've discussed about having visibility and transparency in the space. So we can have more comments or a motion.
I think that even for me, even though there will be transparency requirements due to the D1, I think that I would like to just have it noted as well in our recommendation, just to have extra emphasis to the city council how important that is to us to make sure that those active uses are helping build the external environment. But I'm also okay if we don't, if you guys don't think that's necessary, but that's my impulse.
I obviously support that. I think we have buildings with active uses in the D1 zone where they have screened the windows, and you can't see in, and you don't know what's really going on in there. And I think that's a definite detriment to pedestrian activation. So the current zoning seems to allow what I'm trying to say we should be avoiding, especially given the interesting uses that are pointed out as allowed for activation, which are not typical in the D1 zone. So that's why I feel like we probably, and all we'll do is just say, hey, city council, you may want to look at including this. And that's really all I'm hoping that we can do, because I can see how those areas would have that screening where they block out any visibility from the street. And then we've kind of not, we weren't able to achieve what we're trying to achieve. So.
Does anyone need help with a motion from
Shall
an
we
attorney
attempt-
or something?
Shall we attempt it?
Want to try it?
Okay. Based on the information presented in the discussion, I move that the commission forward a recommendation to adopt the draft development agreement, including the additional conditions 6 through 8, as outlined in the staff report. I propose that we revise condition 6 to remove the following language. Additionally, a signal protected pedestrian crossing shall be installed approximately mid-block on Main Street with specific details subject to approval by the Transportation and Planning Divisions. I also propose that we recommend to the City Council that the applicant be required to assure transparency of the ground floor glass throughout the use of the project. What?
Did Commissioner Scheer also want to include language about the entrance?
I think the entrance comes back to us.
Okay. Yeah. I'll second that motion then.
Any discussion on the motion? Was it clear? Okay. We're going to vote now with Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. That passes 6-0. That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Our last item on the agenda is a zoning consolidation project. This is case number PLN PCM 2024-00707. The planner is Daniel Echeverria. Looks like we also have Mayara Lima, Amy Thompson, and Grant Amon from the city staff. Okay, thank you.
Working? There we go. Okay. So I'm here tonight to give you a brief recap of the MU consolidation, talk about some key issues we've come across, and get your input on those issues, and then provide some general updates on the code. And then we're also here to hold an early public hearing to get some early public input. And I just want to clarify, we're still in the 45-day public process, so we're not asking for a recommendation tonight. So just to recap where we are in the process, we've held several briefings so far on the consolidation. We had the webpage launched the end of July. We've held a couple open houses, held a few tabling at community events, and we've done 8 walking tours. In addition, we sent out thousands of mailed notices, and after that time have held one-on-ones with several property owners about the MU consolidation itself. So just to recap the zones that we're looking at. So we are consolidating 26 different zones into 6 new MU zones. They are the MU2 zones starting at 2 to 3 stories and then going all the way up to the MU, which allows 85 feet, 8-story tall development with additional height allowed through design review up to 125. So the diagram here shows you where those design review thresholds are. We have a design review threshold in MU3 that kicks in at about the 3rd story. So if you want a 4th story, you need to go through design review. The MU8 has that threshold at 75 feet, and then the MU11 has that threshold at 85 feet. So this is different than our other zones. It's regulated by building form. So each zone is organized by its building form, and each building form has its own type of setbacks and height requirements. So in the MU zones, they're grouped into the cottage development, urban house, and 2-family building form. And then the row house building form has its own set of regulations. And then the vertical mixed use, multifamily, and storefront also has its own grouping of regulations within each of the MU zones. So the consolidation impacts almost every chapter in the zoning ordinance. Some of the key chapters that are being changed are the parking and land use chapters, where we've had dedicated briefings to those because of the changes involved. Another big chapter with changes is the design standards chapter, where we are expanding the design standards to apply to all of the areas in the consolidation. So that's a lot of areas that previously didn't have any design standards now are going to be subject to design standards. Beyond that, we've touched various other code sections with the changes here. They're primarily adjustments to integrate the new zones and delete the old zones from the ordinance. So just an example, we have the landscaping chapter where we're having to add the MU zones to where landscaping buffers apply, and then delete all of the older zones from that same list. And that has resulted in the hundreds of pages in your staff reports. There aren't, a lot of those don't have substantive changes, they are just deletions. So the first topic I wanted to touch on tonight was the CG and M1 rezones. So the MU zones are rezoning all of the CG general commercial zones and a portion of the M1 light industrial zones. So for the CG zones, this includes property along 300 West between the tracks line at about 700 West And you can see that in the purple area on the map on the screen. A key thing to keep in mind with the CG is that it allows for light industrial uses like warehousing and industrial assembly, but it also, for the past 20 years, has allowed residential uses. But the M1 zone is different. The M1 zone includes property along 800 and 900 West, and just to the west of I-15. This is in the West Side community area. The M1 zone does not allow residential uses, and it primarily allows light industrial uses. So this is going to be a big change, changing the M1 zone to the MU zone. It's going to introduce residential uses into the area, and on top of that, the MU zones don't generally allow those same light industrial uses. They allow some commercial uses, but don't get to that heavy commercial or light industrial uses that the M1 allows. So because of that change and the potential for creating a lot of non-conforming uses in those M1 areas, we are proposing two fairly significant changes. One would allow any non-conforming use to change to a similar non-conforming use through an administrative process rather than going through a public hearing process. So right now, if you have a non-conforming use and you want to change to another non-conforming use, you may have to go through an appeals hearing officer public hearing to make a determination that your uses are similar enough. So that leads to a lot of insecurity for businesses, property owners that are wanting to change from one to another. So we're hoping that administrative process will make that easier for those potential non-conforming uses. The other change we're proposing to make is to increase the expansion ability. So right now, you're normally limited, if you have a non-conforming use, to expansions of 25% of your square footage or up to 1,000 square foot maximum expansion. Typically, you're ending up limited to 1,000 square feet. So the proposal removes that limit, and so it lets you expand 100% on your existing property with no square footage limit, but it does prohibit you from expanding onto additional property that your use is not currently on. Additionally, we are excluding heavy industrial uses, so some sort of chemical manufacturing, maybe a refinery use. If those are non-conforming, those wouldn't be allowed to expand without limit. So related to non-conforming uses is non-conforming structures. With the expansion of the design standards, we're going to see requirements for windows, entrances, ground floor uses, and that's going to have a big impact on some large structures that are going to be subject to these requirements. So the M1 and CG zones previously had no design requirements, and that's generally because they allow uses that aren't typically walkable. They're generally served by large trucks. So with the rezone, existing buildings could continue to exist without change, but the design standards will kick in when expanding or building new buildings. The issue is that many of these uses, like warehouses and very big box retailers, are likely going to have a lot of difficulty meeting these design standards. We received concerns from at least a few different property owners specifically about that difficulty. So things like ground floor uses, glass, entrances, the length limit of 200 feet are going to be an issue for expansions to these buildings. So for the MU zones, we've incorporated a specific exception for grocery stores to expand with some sort of a limit, but within a small expansion, they wouldn't have to comply with the design standards. So that's a carve out in the MU3 zones already. But we could apply a similar exception for non-complying structures in all of the zones to allow for some level of expansion without having to comply with the design standards. So that is a question for the commission tonight, whether they want us to look at creating some sort of exception there. And we're hoping to return to this question right after the public hearing. We might get some input from businesses about this particular topic. So an additional topic we'd like the commission to weigh in on, there are a few down zones we're looking at in the North Temple and 400 South areas. So through the engagement and mapping process, we've run into some small residential side streets where the allowed zoning might be causing or leading to compatibility issues with existing residences. So we're considering downzoning some of these streets to MU3 from the current MU5 or 8 to still allow some development potential and change, but more of a similar scale to existing residences. So the one question for the commission is whether the commission supports downzoning these areas. And I'll return to this question after the hearing, but I just want to quickly go over some slides with some examples. And just before I get to the slides, the image to the right on the screen shows how some of these downzones might work. So MU3 would allow 3 or so stories of development, and then you'd have a 10-foot rear yard, and then the MU5 zone, or 8, would have a 20-foot rear yard, including a landscape with trees, followed by a step back at about the 30-foot level or after 3 stories, and that step back would be about 10 feet in depth. So this would just help give these small-scale streets and residences some breathing room. So the first area is Emerald Avenue. This is MU8. It currently allows for development up to 8 stories in height, and this Emerald Avenue is located just off of North Temple at 800 West. So you're kind of seeing some of that development already happening along the street. You're seeing an 8-story multifamily structure being built there. You're also seeing some townhomes being developed toward the middle of the block, including some townhomes that are just in permitting right now that aren't built. So we're considering rezoning the center of the street, just including the existing townhomes and the small single-family homes that are still intact there, down to the MU3. And that would then require some buffering for any future development toward those homes on the south end at the top of the screen. The other street we're looking at is Jeremy Street. This is at 100 South and 900 West. So currently the proposal has included the center of Jeremy Street. That's already gone out in our notices and is on our website. But we are considering expanding that MU3 to the north and south ends of the street as well to help soften that transition from MU5 down to the lower scale street there. And then the final one is Linden Avenue. So this is at 700 East and 400 South. So this is in the TSA zone that allows you to go up to 5 stories already. There's actually a special step back requirement along Linden Avenue already that scales that height on that north end next to Linden, and it kind of caps it at 25 feet and then slowly increases up to 5 stories as you get away from Linden. Instead of replicating that step back specifically, we're proposing or considering just rezoning that strip next to Linden Avenue down to MU3. So it's just a basic 3-story height limit rather than a stepping requirement there. So one area the commission had input on at prior meetings was the potential for some squished floor heights. So the 12-foot ground floor requirement in combination with that 5-foot increase in height that we're allowing in some of the zones or proposing in some of the zones, it's leading to some height ranges where we could potentially see some developers squish their floor heights down. We ran some tests and it seems like we may run into that combination in the MU2 and potentially the MU5 zones. So for example, in the MU2, normally with no ground floor minimum of 12 feet, you'd see kind of uniform 8 to 9 story floor heights in that 3-story structure. But the 12-foot requirement starts to squish those upper stories. So the second level and the third level end up being potentially just 7 foot 6 inches. We're not completely sure if you can make that work or not. It's getting really tight, and you can see in this example, we're already 4 inches over. So we're continuing to look at that with the building code folks to see if that's actually a serious potential there. But potential options include leaving to IBC, the International Building Code, which sets a cap at 7 foot 6 inches as the bare minimum for your floor heights, and just see what happens. We could also increase allowed heights 1 to 2 feet, where this might be an issue for some zones, or we could limit the 12-foot ground floor applicability to maybe just the taller zones. So on top of that, there's just some other substantive changes that we've made to the draft since the initial July drafts went public. So we've expanded where step back buffers apply The step back buffer is typically on the rear of a property next to a lower scale zone. It requires a 10-foot step after about 30 feet in height, or after the third floor that's over 30 feet in height. We are expanding that to apply to trails and open space. So one example would be it would apply next to Hidden Hollow in Sugar House. And additionally, we're proposing to apply to the MU2 and 3 zones as well. So if you're in MU5 or MU8 and you're next to MU3, you'd have to scale down and step down next to those zones. On the MU5 and 6, we've also reduced the default rear yard from 20 feet to 10 feet. The 10 feet better aligns with the existing zone requirements that we're consolidating there for those zones. For the MU3, we've removed the limit on design review height requests, so you can request height next to lower zones. In the July draft, there was a limit. You couldn't request additional height if you were next to the R15 or similar low-scale zones. But since we are applying a step back, we're applying a 20-foot rear yard, and there is an additional step back required through the Planning Commission's design review process with any additional height request. We think that the potential for height conflicts are pretty low, and you could apply additional step back when it comes before you. Additional area where we did some clarifications to ground floor uses. We also added an exception to the ground floor use requirement. So if you're on a high activity street like 900 South, where we require retail or restaurant uses, if you're doing a multi-building development and one of your buildings does meet the requirement, you could also, under proposal, have another building on the site that just has residential uses rather than high activity uses. And then we've also expanded where the high activity retail restaurant requirement applies in the MU3. So in the MU3, we require high activity uses around certain intersections of streets. And the prior requirement that we proposed was 50 feet, which seemed pretty insubstantial once we looked at how many properties that actually included. So we did increase that to 100 feet. So that's about covers all the content that I had. So one note here, we recommend holding the hearing first and then discussing the questions. And then just to make this procedurally smooth, and we are recommending the commission make a formal motion to continue the public hearing to an additional meeting. And we're planning to come back on October 23rd for an additional public hearing. That's about it for me.
Thank you. I'll take your recommendation and move right to the public hearing. So if you wish to speak for the public hearing, you can pass the card up to the staff and we'll put you in the line. So far I have, the first comment will be from Ms. Cromer and then Mr. Ogg. So you two get ready to approach the mic. When you get there, and please announce your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. There's one other thing I wanted to say. Oh, and if you have a question, we won't answer questions during this public hearing portion. I'll make a note of your questions and see if we can answer it when we pause the public comment portion of the meeting, or we can connect you to staff if you have a real specific question that you can get an answer from if you have something really specific. So go ahead, Ms. Cromer.
Hi. Wait a minute. I don't think it's on. Little wizard. Oh, thank goodness you're here. All right. Teacher voice. Cindy Cromer. My comments tonight are at the 30,000 foot level, and they're based on my experience in the 95 zoning rewrite and also the conflict between my residential use and the abutting grocery store, oh there it goes, which compacts its garbage and allows it to age in place. I am not, as a result, a fan of mixed use. Loading docks are problematic in terms of multiple types of pollution, noise, odor, and air quality. Back to my experience in the zoning rewrite. It is now 29 and a half years since the adoption of the RB and the RO zones. They were dysfunctional from the outset. No one intervened except to increase the number of residential units in the RB zone above a single unit. Yep, originally only a single unit of housing was permitted in the RB zone. My request is that you prepare for modifications immediately after the council adopts the changes. The city cannot make such extensive changes without some problems, even when Daniel Echeverria is the planner, and he always gets the most complicated assignments.
Thank you.
So we should not wait 29 and a half years again. You have the authority to initiate petitions. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Mr. Ogg, and then Paul Christensen.
Is the name on that Iowa?
Yes, I'm sorry. I read it as a G. I'm sorry.
Members of the commission, my name is Bernie Iowa. I am a member and officer of a church by the name of Summum, and I'm here to voice a concern about this consolidation. Summum is a church on the west side of Salt Lake, and we are a church who holds the sun as a symbol of the nature of creation and as a divine symbol. We even have a picture of a painting of the sun over our altar in our pyramid temple. The sunlight that comes down on our sanctuary is very important to us. It's part of our religious practice. It's part of the meditations we practice. It's part of the environment that is created within our pyramid. It is also important in the growing of spiritual plants that we have. We have a greenhouse. And if you look through history, you can see that the sun and spiritual plants have been a part of cultures for thousands of years and have played a very important role in their religious practices. We have an empty lot right next to our sanctuary on the south and west sides of our sanctuary. An empty lot that 3 years ago was changed the zoning to RMU, and there are plans to build a 75-foot building next to us. Now, with this consolidation, the proposal is to change the zoning so that a 90-foot structure can be built right next to us. Now, I know there is an agreement with the developer right now to build the 75-foot structure, but as soon as that zoning changes, I can see that agreement go away and plans pop up for a 90-foot building. Now, regardless if it's 75 or 90 feet, a building that size right next to us is going to cast a shadow on our sanctuary.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Awa.
so
Thank
we
you.
are very concerned and would like you to reconsider what's going on.
Thank you. Up next is Paul Christensen, and after him is Ms. Kinzer.
Paul Christensen, own properties in various areas. I'm generally in favor of this. Just one thing I'd say at a high level is that when it comes to active use on the ground levels, make sure that you're not assuming that there is no crime in an area. As someone who has to deal with properties, things that happen, I think sometimes it's very like a poem, thinking that having these ground uses with active uses will be great for the city. But if it's not set up so that it can be protected against crime, that's really hard on a lot of property owners, particularly in the North Temple area. So I just would ask you to really be mindful of that as this is going forward on that one small little thing to watch that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Up next is Ms. Kinzer, and then Mr. Engel.
Hello, my name is Ashley Kinzer. I'm a resident and small business owner living and working in the area impacted by this proposed rezone. I come to you with an invitation to fulfill your mandate to work in service of your constituents. We do not want this rezone. You are not here to serve your own interests or those of wealthy developers. I invite you to deeply consider the long-term impacts of essentially giving developers carte blanche to the detriment of residents who have been living here and benefiting our community for decades. part of this rezone brings up an old Salt Lake City failure for me. In the late 80s, the Broadway towers were built with no setback or green space, with the promise that the building would include green space on the roof and a grocery store on the street level. However, the green space was never provided and the grocery store is long gone, leaving the remaining residents to live with the negative impacts of zero step back or green space. We'd like to see the maintenance of requirements of developers to provide parking, setbacks for light penetration and water drainage, and green space for use by humans and animals, and to help reduce the impact of global warming. It is imperative that the committee understand that maintaining the charm and individuality of the older building and existing communities will inherently keep Salt Lake City attractive to developers long term. Please keep the needs of your constituents at the forefront of your decision making as you make choices that impact the future landscape of our city. It is of the utmost importance that you all develop a culture of the highest standard of accountability in aligning with the needs of the communities you serve. Thank you.
Up next is Mr. Engel and then Mr. Hopkins.
Hello, my name's Ben Engel, and I live at Hollywood Condominiums on First South between 2nd and 3rd East. And I'm concerned that the consolidation will kind of rubber stamp some of the development where we have, I think, the being able to have zero setbacks for backyard usage and side yard usage can be a real detriment to historical properties, and depending upon what it is that's next to them, where we have vacant lots that are next to them, we don't know what's going to be built there later, and having a stronger consideration for how those things are going to impact our neighborhoods over time. There are appropriate places where having a parking structure directly next to another parking structure with no space in between makes sense, but a lot of times where we've got a small setback from our historical properties to begin with, and then we put another tall structure next to that with no setbacks, it kind of makes the onus of that walkable area on the ground, between buildings is now, the responsibility of the person with the old historical building. It seems that the newer properties should have to share some of that responsibility in making sure that our neighborhoods are walkable, and it sounds like some of that will go without review, and I think that it's important to consider the buildings that are around wherever it is that they're developing. I really am in favor of simplifying the process so that we can get development done quicker, because I think that the blight that takes place when we have old properties or empty lots that are surrounded by chain link fence invites a lot of crime, and it just it has a terrible impact on our neighborhood. And I know that the authority of the Planning Commission doesn't necessarily involve how it is that people take care of these properties if they're not actually being developed or if they're in this planning stages. But if there's anything that we can do to expedite that to get our properties developed nicely and responsibly, it would be awesome. But it doesn't mean that we should compromise our values in order to get that done. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Stephen Hopkins and then Dan Danzy.
My name is Stephen Hopkins. I am in favor of this proposal, mostly because we know Utah and Salt Lake specifically have a severe housing shortage, and so if there's a way we can get more housing, I am completely in favor of that. We know the demand is there, our population is growing, Utah has a lot of kids. The only way to bring that down is by adding more supply. So I am completely in favor of the proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. Up next is Dan Danzy and then Ann Ruth Isaacson.
Thank you. My name is Dan Danzy. I'm here representing some property owners that are located at 1055, 1065, and 1075 West North Temple. These are properties that are immediately to the south from the Utah Fairgrounds, and they are properties that currently consist of one-story commercial or light industrial uses. The owners of these properties are in favor of the proposed consolidation. As far as the North Temple corridor goes, where these properties are located, they believe that the proposed consolidation will allow for some much needed and exciting redevelopment on North Temple. However, the property owners do believe that the proposal could be enhanced by specifically tailoring it to address the certain needs of specific properties. And so with respect to our properties, again, 1055, 1065, and 1075 West North Temple, we are requesting that the proposal be modified to change the proposed redesignation from an MU6 redesignation to an MU8 redesignation. Now, the North Temple corridor is largely already designated as MU8. I'm a little, I didn't realize the podium was going to be so far away from the dice, but these blue areas are MU8, and as you can see on the North Temple corridor, it's largely MU8 already. Ours would be right here, part of this green area that's currently designated as the MU6. We believe that the potential redevelopment of this property is more likely to be consistent with adjoining uses, and recommend a tweak to MU6 or excuse me, MU8 for this property.
Thank you.
Thank you,
sir. Up next is Ann Ruth Isaacson, then Darren Perry, then Justin Connie. Sure. Sure. Can you grab the microphone?
Hi, my name is Ann Ruth Isaacson. I want you guys to consider the impact that the zoning merge might have on our quality of life as community members. To make it clear what the concerns are, I'm going to bring a real-time example that we brought to you guys October 10th when Overland proposed a 125-foot building where there is now a 2-story building, and proposed 0 to 10-foot setbacks where there's supposed to be 30. You guys, October 10th, approved the 125-foot height, but rejected the setbacks that weren't 30 feet. Overland came back in the spring-summer time frame and said they wanted 0 setbacks. They haven't come here because they're kind of hoping this will come to fruition and then they could build as high as they want here. So I just want to show you what that would mean. If they could build 125 with 0 setbacks, they could build like this. If the Wade building can build with 0 setbacks at 90 feet, this is where they could build it to. Then if the Satoru lot, these 2 lots are now parking, would want it to build to 0 setbacks at 90 feet, that would mean. None of these buildings would have windows. None of these buildings would have green space. And our 118-year properties that are on the National Historic Residence will have no sunlight. This is our southern light. All the garden, all the work we're doing will be gone. We've just spent over $500,000 restoring the masonry, and we're about to redo the woodwork on this building. And if there is no place for the water and the snow to go, our sandstone foundations will crack. We will lose these buildings. There is a National Park Service document that provides guidelines for protecting historic buildings when you go and build something new and higher. Please use this, and please don't change the setbacks.
Thank you, Ms. Isaacson. Thank you. Up next is Darren Perry and then Justin Connie.
Hi, my name is Darren Peary. I just want to reiterate what these wonderful people that I work with and trying to keep our community positive, wonderful, open to light, and free of crime and degradation. It's an ongoing struggle. And by not allowing the sun, the green, the beautiful plants that we enjoy every day when we get out and walk about, we are losing our community. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please state your name and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name's Justin Connie. So I live downtown. I've lived in Salt Lake City for about a year. And what I really like about it is the walkability. I'm for density. When I looked at the MU8, like was discussed by the city at MU3, there are structures and there needs to be green space and air. So my biggest issue is with the setbacks in the MU8 zone, not so much the height. Because what that does is that eliminates a lot of the airflow. As we know, downtown in Salt Lake City is very hot. There's a lot of pressure because of the climate change as well as other matters. So when I look at some of the properties we have, including historical ones, I find that these setbacks may create an area where people won't have windows that actually circulate when you have two large buildings. So I just like the commission to consider that setback on the MU8 as something going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to make a public comment? You can approach the mic and you'll have 2 minutes. Please state your name.
Thank you. My name is Shelley Carpenter. I'm here on behalf of Labor Union IATSE Local 99. We are the labor union behind Backstage and Entertainment. Our office in Union Hall is located on 800 South and approximately 500 West. My concern with this, we are zoned to go M11, which we haven't even gotten into tonight. As we have seen the neighborhood become activated with things like the Granary Live concerts, as well as the open streets, which I applaud the city's work on, I am not seeing enough to mitigate crowds, traffic, and trash. So I'm hoping that the commission will consider what can be done to support property owners. We're a little nonprofit. We've been there for 25 years. We cannot keep up when you suddenly bring 10,000 people in front of our building. We have re-landscaped the front of the building, 6 times now, just this year. So I would like to ask the commission to put into the ears of the developers and whatnot, what can be done to support existing businesses as we have 10 times more trash, foot traffic, et cetera. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Go ahead, you can approach the microphone. You'll have 2 minutes. If you'll tell us your name, I'd appreciate it.
I really had not planned on speaking, but my name is Lane Anthony. I'm a business owner. 54 years my family's been in business here in Salt Lake. And the taller buildings with no setbacks are taking away the visibility of the walkability and creating areas where homeless encampments are made and let go for weeks and weeks, if not months at a time. We did have on our own property, unknown to us, a tree literally with a Tarzan woman living in it. So nothing prepared, I apologize. I'm a little rambling, but I am definitely not in favor of this rezoning.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments? Okay,
Madam Chair, we did get one email.
Do you want to read it? You have 2 minutes.
Okay. Dear Planning Commissioners, I'm writing to provide public comments on the zoning consolidation proposal on today's agenda. I support the city's effort to consolidate all of area zones into a much smaller subset, which will make review and consistency across the city much easier and streamlined. I also support the effort to update the zoning so that more of the city's master plans are reflected in our ordinances. With that being said, the timeline for review of this far-reaching proposal has been relatively short. I've had conversations with planners and others in the city that indicated a desire for staff and city council to push the proposal through quickly. Expediting such consequential policy for how our city continues to grow and evolve leaves room for a lot of error that could unintentionally detract from the city's goals. My request is the city provide additional time for more stakeholders to be engaged in this process so that the refinement can be made to finer details of the ordinance that may not be carefully considered by working through this in such haste. One example is how so many zones may lose their ability to build out to property lines despite the fact that they are urbanizing areas. Overall, this is moving the city in the right direction. However, the city should take more time to be more thorough. Best, Amanda Dillon.
Thank you. That's a good segue to the fact that I'm not going to close the public hearing right now. Is this an appropriate time to make a motion and vote on extending the public hearing until at least October 23rd? Okay, let's do that. Does someone want to make a motion?
I will make a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Christensen.
A second.
Thank you, Commissioner Shear. And we're gonna vote. Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
and I also will vote yes. So we'll keep the public comment open at least until October 23rd, which is when we'll hear it again in this meeting. Also, I want to let you know that if you want to make a comment by email, the staff contact is available, and anything you email will become part of the record in the meantime too. Now, I'm going to take just a minute to summarize the things that I heard in the public comment period. There's some concern about the residential plus other uses together, concern about tall buildings and shadows from those, making sure that active use is balanced with crime considerations, some comments about the negative impacts to residents and green space, and setbacks, how those will impact residents. There was support for simplifying the process to increase the speed of improving our city. Some comments about increasing housing opportunities, and also a recommendation that we consider density, walkability, and once again, traffic, trash, crowds, those kinds of things. We also have been asked to consider a couple of specific questions. Mr. Echeverria, do you want to start with those?
There we go. So we can start with a question regarding non-conforming or non-complying structures. So the question is related to whether staff should create an exception to allow for some expansions of existing non-complying structures, and in those expansions wouldn't necessarily have to meet design standards.
I'll pipe in with it's like a yes and a no, right? So if we're looking at the Costco on Third West, I don't think the loading bays should be facing Third West. So I feel like no, we shouldn't exempt them from certain design standards. But I feel like maybe we could come up with a way that we have. I'm trying to find a different word than standards, but a way that administratively, so it doesn't have to come before the planning commission. So maybe it's not an actual like design review or whatnot, but that the admin can determine certain uses that are appropriate facing the street, that they be maybe located to the side, etc. So that not everything, if we're again looking at Costco, everything about Costco and its entrance is behind Third West and facing the huge parking lot, and nothing is visible to the street. And so I feel like that's where my no comes in. Like, I don't want to exempt them from everything, but I understand, maybe no glass, those types of things. But to just have that kind of a wall along the street, I don't think that's a good design. And I don't think that's what we want to promote, but it doesn't have to be exactly this. So exempting them from active uses and glass and entrances, yeah, okay, I can see how that can go for like a big box retailer, but I think that it's not inappropriate for us to require different site orientations or the site design of how that is going to flow and look towards the street. And that perhaps you could write in there that it can be done under administrative ruling to be a little bit more expeditious. Those are my thoughts.
I think I agree with Commissioner Berry. You know, I mean, what are we talking about in expansion? If we expand Costco toward the street, then yes, we want something on that street. We don't want a blank wall on that street. If we expand Lowe's, you know, maybe it becomes an L or something. I mean, I can't even imagine how Lowe's is going to expand, but you know, it's kind of landlocked there unless it goes into its parking lot. And if it comes forward into the parking lot, then yeah, I sure want it to have, to us look at the glass and the entrances and length limits and things like that. So especially for retailers, and maybe there's a distinguishing thing between retailers and people who have warehouses or light industrial uses that are pre-existing, where that, you know, especially for a retailer though, I think that the requirements for glass entrances and active uses is a reasonable one, especially if they're expanding enough to more than 25%, which is enough to activate the requirements for, to comply.
Any other thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think I would be, I'm more receptive to creating an exemption for design standards for some of these existing retailers, just because I think that I think it's important to kind of like put them in context in terms of what the active use is for them, whether that's creating people spilling out into surrounding areas, or if at a certain point these places get big enough that they are islands, right? That they are functionally places where you go and then you leave. It's not like you necessarily go and then kind of walk over next door so much because you need a car to get there. And so I think that then the question becomes like what it looks like along like Third West, right? And I don't know, I'm not sure what the answer is. I worry about applying the same design standards because I think that's how you end up with like a lot of like these kind of like almost like faux historical looking things where it's like we want it to pretend it's still this when it's something else. And so you end up with a Costco, but then it's got like facade broken up every 40 feet with like Victorian windows in it or whatever that then lead into nothing. And I think that if there are going to be design standards, they probably need to be a separate set almost, or like considered differently. I think this would probably be, I know we were looking previously at the not general site area plan. I forget the level of it, but the plan for this kind of area. And I think that maybe that's a consideration that could be kind of pulled into that, because I think that if we apply the same design standards, we're just going to end up with like with like a facade literally just pasted on that doesn't actually reflect anything behind it, and that's actually a detriment. And that if we want to figure out what we do with when we have this long block that, you know, we still want to look nice and like not be a detriment to the places on either side of it, but it is its own thing. It's not like you're walking along and then halfway down the block you decide to turn in. So I don't know. I think that it is a hard question about how those work, and the fact that they're going through that area plan right now, I think, is probably the best way to look at that and try and think of a more tailored approach to it, and what design standards would make sense in that context. So.
I think, yeah, the other thing that's a possibility here too, and it sort of speaks to some of the things that public comments, is that instead of trying to make this into a fake, you know, old Main Street or something, a warehouse, for example, you know, is to increase the landscaping standards a lot, so that basically you're creating a 50-foot strip. If they want to expand, sure, but they're going to have a 50-foot strip in front with heavy landscaping. So we don't have to look at that, you know, as we're driving by. And it also supports all the other things that green space supports, cools the street, et cetera, et cetera. So I think some kind of heavier landscaping requirement if you want to expand, especially along a street, might mitigate that sort of time between now and 50 years from now when things are different than they are. And even if 50 years from now, those trees will be great. So,
yeah, I think that might be a good way to, I agree that might be a good way to kind of basically essentially say, okay, now we have a narrow park for this block, and that's what kind of ties the two sides together and makes it more of a public benefit, but still allows it to be what it is without wasting money on kind of paper mache.
Good. Okay.
Sounds like
I
there's some
think I have one
comfort with
more.
looking at that. Oh, go
I have
ahead.
one more comment on that. So kind of when thinking about modifying some of these kind of structures, I with the new MU zones, they're going to have corridors that are a higher intensity. So I think with corridors that are a higher intensity, we might have some of these standards that apply more on, like the landscaping buffer more on a higher intensity street. I'm not sure if Third West is a higher intensity street in the new MU zone, but I think that dealing with what are the parts of the city that we want to focus on bringing life to the most, and having stricter standards in those places than other places in the city. So if there's a warehouse that wants to grow slightly more than 25% and it's surrounded by other warehouses, then I still like the idea of doing a landscape buffer, but maybe the ground floor transparency doesn't have to be as high on those spaces of the city that are not high intensity. So that's kind of my thought on that.
Thank you. Did you get enough?
So I think there is some comfort with looking at some level of exception, maybe some landscaping requirements in lieu of design standards. So we'll regroup on this and come back with something on this one.
Thank you. The next question you asked is on small streets and scale. Does the commission support downzoning these areas?
So we can look at it individually or just overall.
Well, I have a question. Is your question about these three specific items? Are you looking at every block in the whole city, or you just have a question about these three items?
These three are the ones that have come up.
Because an owner said this
yeah,
seems problematic.
Some of it is internal, and then some of it is public comments that have directed us specifically to these. Where we,
add that
yeah.
that North Temple property to the list of things to consider. That's a different question, maybe, but I know you were taking notes while the public was making comment, but.
Yeah, so we have also heard upzone requests as well, which we generally have shied away from doing any specific upzoning of going from like a 5-story TSA to an 8-story TSA. I think we generally would encourage people to submit a zoning amendment application to do that.
Right. Will you give us a quick overview of what this process is, that it's not rezoning the city, it's
Yes.
or how can you explain it?
Yeah, so what we've tried to do is match the existing zoning allowances. So a zone that allows 5 stories, we're moving it to another zone that also just allows 5 stories. We're generally not, there's some allowances for like an additional story, but generally we've just gone straight across. So we're not generally doing an up zone for properties in this consolidation. We're taking 5 similar zones and bringing them into one zone.
Right. Or and how long has this process been going on?
So we started briefings earlier this year, but we started the public noticing in July.
Okay.
Yeah, so we haven't taken a comprehensive look everywhere in the city to determine this property should be upzoned or not. If we did, perhaps on North Temple, we'd see some properties that may warrant some upzoning, but that wasn't the goal as part of this project.
Right.
So why are we thinking about this then? I mean, are these specific places where people have I mean, I think in the application of this, you're absolutely right. I mean, we sort of have to make a kind of, okay, we're not really changing the zoning. And what's the current zoning in a place like this?
So this in particular is 8-story TSA.
Okay.
And we're realizing that, and we've heard from the public as part of this, that they are seeing negative impacts to their street, to their livability, because these 8-story buildings are coming up straight behind their single-family homes.
So is this one of those places where you could apply a step back?
Yes.
And that would solve a lot of this problem? I mean,
Yes.
Your section that you showed of, an 8-story versus a 3-story, but with the step back, I think you're going to create, sort of in the same situation as the person with the model. Applying a step back, especially to a story property or to an existing lower level property, lower scale property, but especially as story properties. That would seem to be a reasonable way to address some of this.
Yes.
That was my question too. I was like, how is this not spot zoning when we're consolidating the mixed use? Like we're making a general, all of this zone is going to go to this zone. And then to consider 3 streets separately seems like not part of this process. Like that should be part of a different process where we consider, oh, that is a historical building. And
But you could make a general rule about historic properties that have been designated historic properties. Do we not have a general rule about that?
We do in the design standards, and we are proposing to apply that to all the new zones. So if you have a historic property that's under 50 feet in height, then any development next door has to do some sort of stepping.
Yeah.
Okay.
At that high level.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is really the level of public input that we've gotten on these particular small streets, especially with our walking tours, where we've seen the changes and the kind of the negative impacts that this development has had on neighbors, and trying to get ahead of that.
So this small streets thing would apply to places where there are small streets. It's basically, and the small street would be 30 feet, 40 feet. Is that what you're looking at?
So we consider doing something like that, where maybe a setback or step back applies next to just a generic, your street is less than 50 feet wide, this applies. But the approach that we proposed is just downzoning those particular properties along those interior streets. So the difference there is someone doesn't have to dig and find that there's a special step back next to these streets. They just see this is the zoning. It allows 3 stories, and that's what I can do.
Sorry.
Can I add to? I think the difference Mayara Lima.
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you.
The difference between the request to upzone and this one, for upzone, we're granting more to a property owner. In this case, the property owners don't want to keep that zone that they have because of the development that they're seeing and the amount of redevelopment of those streets. So it's a request to revert before the TSA. Does that make sense? So I think it's a little bit different from upzoning to the downzoning.
Mayara, that's a Pandora's box, right?
That's
Right
what I
there,
thought.
what you just described.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, that is a floodgate. Do we really want to take that on? Because how many property owners are going to be like, hey, I don't like my zone?
Right. Yeah, sorry.
These specific instances seem like, yeah, we should care, and some of this seems like not great, and I'm hearing this is not great. But whether that should be part of this process, it seems like that might be a separate issue.
I don't actually see any difference between this and the North Temple properties. I mean, if you're going to make a rule that this is what we're not changing the zoning as we do this, then don't change the zoning as we do this.
Yeah, that was my question, was whether or not these are kind of just general feedback, or if every one of these people has said that they are okay with that, because
Yeah, unless you're going to make a general rule that applies to that whole entire that every MU8. Maybe you want to do that.
I think it probably is one of those things that could spider out. So it probably, I think in going through this, we'll probably identify lots of things where we have to say, okay, like this is a separate issue, and then we come back to that rather than trying to bundle it all together. So I think my suggestion would be, say, like we then put, you know, a presentation on these 3 or whatever in after, and look at downzoning them separately.
Any more comments on that? Okay.
I guess related to that, so Linden Avenue, the current TSA zoning actually does have a requirement that pushes the height lower along Linden Avenue already. Is there comfort transferring that limitation over in some capacity, whether that's the same step back requirement that's already in the code? Because essentially by not including some sort of step back requirement, we are upzoning those properties.
Can we make a general rule again? Is that what you're asking for? To make a general rule about places with narrow streets?
It is an option.
If you can make a general rule that applies to all the all the zones on smaller streets, or all the zones where there's something else across the street that's a lower zone, then yes. But if it's Linden Street and Emerald Street, no. I mean, I really think that opens the door for craziness.
I agree with Commissioner Scheer, and to kind of provide some context and guidelines so that it's not every property owner in the city being like, oh, I don't like my zone. I'd like to up zone. I'd like to down zone. That you do create a general rule that for these specific types of streets, these narrow, small streets, and we have, you know, a handful of them.
No, we have hundreds.
We have
hundreds
but they're
of
in
these
like
streets.
certain areas. They're not, you know.
Mostly residential, actually, so they don't really have this issue.
Yeah, a lot
because
of them
it's
aren't even in this zone, like this consolidation. So I agree with Commissioner Scheer in that maybe you just approach it in a more defined way, so that it's clear to every property owner where this is applicable and where this is not, and then you're not looking at every little parcel as well. I agree that approach is probably cleaner and more equitable.
Me too. Yeah?
Okay.
That's what we have to say about that.
Okay, we will look at that then.
And then the last item that I made a note of that you wanted to hear from us on is if we want to make an accommodation of 1 or 2 feet to affect the height of floor height.
And I could see Commissioner Scheer had some reactions to that.
I have, from the beginning, I have said 3 stories. We don't care how high the stories are, you know?
Yeah.
3 stories. And then, you know, sort of, if somebody wants to make, I mean, we do care, 7'6" is the minimum, obviously, by code, but if somebody wants to make 15-foot ceilings in all of their things, and it's an MU3 zone or MU whatever it is, then so it gets to be 40 feet, 50 feet tall. You know, I'm not sure that height is all that big a deal most of the time, unless you're right up against another use. But most people aren't gonna go crazy here. But this is an issue that I think architects are always struggling with this, you know, 30 foot 4 inches thing. You know?
Yeah. So Bree and I are probably the evangelists on this, but a couple things. One, I think that we're like halfway switching from going by building height to going by number of levels, right? So we're calling it MU11, but then we still have building heights. And so we're creating a conflict in that needs to get resolved, whether it's figuring out exactly what the building height needs to be for that. or not. One thing, in reading through the staff report, I just want to clarify. I don't think the question is there was a talk in there about like setting a minimum height for levels. I don't think that's a good idea, because we don't want to say you have to do this, right? If like, I mean, I wouldn't work for anyone who would build anything less than like a 9-foot floor to floor, so you get an 8-foot clear height. But I don't think that's something we need to mandate, right? Because that's a market question. I think that the amount of possible kind of squishing that we're talking about here is being undersold a bit. And it's, you talk about this 12-foot ground floor height, and I'm not even particularly worried about like whether that goes into effect or not, because commercial like market kind of standards for ground floor retail on anything that's going to be like podium construction or anything that's going to be 5, 6, 8 stories, 12 foot's actually really short. And so you're setting a you're setting this limit as though it's what's going to push it. But the reality is that that's a limit that's going to get exceeded almost all of the time. The floor to floor for ground floor retail is like 15 to 18 generally. 20 is pushing it, and is probably only for a couple of more high-end retail places. But I think that that's getting undersold. So, right? So if it is a 3-story building and someone wants 18 foot, because they want to have a nice retail space on the ground floor, that this height limit wipes out the possibility of doing 3 stories, right? If 12 feet is going to push it to 7'6", which is already too tight, then 15, 18 is going to get rid of a level. And as an architect, a lot of the early kind of planning stuff that I do is looking at these height limits and about what we can get in there. And it always goes for the extra level that gets us down a little bit more and starts to squish things down. And so I really do think that it's funny, we started the process and we talked about what are the opportunities that switching to this kind of thing allows. And I think that it does allow for the possibility for people who want to build taller stories. And I think that that's a net good. And I don't think that it means that someone is going to go into MU3 and build something that's 150 feet tall because they can make 3 50-foot stories, right? That's just not something that anyone's going to pay for or want or try and do. The only kind of conceivable workaround I can think of is in terms of mezzanine levels, and you could kind of work in the language so that caps that out. Because again, I've been on projects where we were like, okay, well, we have so much extra space, but we can't do anything with it. We do split level apartments that are 2 levels? And anyway, so mezzanines are the only way I could think about kind of that being abused. But I think that the potential for us ending up with a lot of places that people don't want to live in long term is really big for this. And so I do think it's important to either raise the height or just get rid of it. The other thing is, we talked at one point about the height limits for stuff on top of buildings, and we were talking about parapets and things like that. Did that change ever go through? I don't recall.
So that was transmitted to council. I don't know if they've taken action on that. Maybe Myara or...
Okay.
Not yet. No action's been taken yet, but it did go to council.
So the reason I bring it up is because that's the other place that you lose a lot of height in terms when you're, as an architect, when you're trying to plan out what you can put in. And so I think the 2 places where this is underselling how much height we could be losing are in that ground floor, where it's really could be upwards of 18, 20 feet. And then in the top, where the way that the code is currently written, it's for flat roofs, it's to the top of the highest coping. And that's at the parapet level, not at the level of the roof. And so often that adds another 3 feet of parapet if you have a building big enough where people are going to walk around on it. And the structural system for your roof is generally much deeper, just because since people aren't working on it, it's more cost effective. And so that can end up being another 2 feet or so. So you'll often end up basically lose 5 feet off the top. So you'll often end up with kind of 18 to 20 feet on the bottom and 5 feet on the top. And then you're trying to calculate what that space in between is and whether it's 8 feet or 10 feet or 12 feet or whatever it is. So I would, it is a hard question. And because I tried to do a little bit of kind of math in my head and look at just the IBC building height requirements and what those would kind of pencil out and like what they would top out at, because there are building height requirements based on that and based on construction type. And so by getting rid of saying floor to floor, we're kind of falling back on that. But I do think this is something that needs a little bit more to be kind of worked out. And I do want to make sure that we accurately show the spacing at the top and the bottom so that we are getting what we, so that, you know, the residential or office or whatever it is ending up nice. That's another thing is if office levels, I mean, you can get down to, conceivably you can get down to like 8 foot clear for residential, but for office levels, you'll probably be at least 9 or 10 clear. So if a building isn't just retail, then residential, if it's retail, then office, then residential, then those office levels are going to be, you know, another couple extra feet there. So it's a hard question, and there's a lot of math that someone has to do, and I'll probably try and do a little bit of it, but I think this is an important one because I don't want to. I've designed way too many buildings where it's like, oh, and now we're getting down to, you know, 8 feet, and there isn't really any space above the door because the door is as tall as the room, and you know, it's not a way that we want to build to last. So
I completely agree with Commissioner Scott. I mean, if there's a way that we could revolutionize the zoning to allow more vertical space inside of a building, that is life, that is light, that is, you know, not having that sort of squished low ceiling feeling. And if you're allowed to, if it's 4 inches on a MU30, you know, that's just, that, you know, that's really silly. Let's let it be 3 stories and see what happens.
Commissioner Krasik?
There's definitely, like, these two are the architects, so there's some deferring that I need to just do to them. But like kind of just this image here, it seems like in saying we add 4 feet and now we've got 12 feet on the ground and 8 foot on each floor above, that still is putting it in terms of a height, like a maximum height. And there is some deferring that I do need to do, but it does seem like, to me, on that kind of MU3 zone, to just increase just slightly, a few feet, would make it consistent with the rest of all of the MU zones. If you go like an MU6 and you say, well, it's 6 stories and each story is 12 feet, then you have a story that's much more than if each story is 8 feet, or, I mean, with allowances for the ground floor. But if it's not regulated by a height cap, then it is possible for one to build great luxury apartments that double the height of the area. And I don't think 12 feet is unbelievable for a apartment. It would be very nice, and I would love to live in an apartment with 12 feet. But if you live in an MU11 where every apartment is 12 feet, which again, cost would be a problem, but it seems like having some cap height seems reasonable for some of the concerns that the public was talking about today of kind of where does the impact of my property exist with this other property. And if there's not a cap height, that people can have an expectation of how impacted their property is going to be, then it becomes complicated for the average citizen on the street and the average neighbor. So that is my comment of putting a number to it. I think is important, especially on this 3-story. Throw a couple feet on it, it doesn't make a huge difference. But when you use the same kind of standard across the whole system, then it could make big things. So that's it.
Yeah, so on that a little bit, I think that's part of someone who knows development a little bit better would weigh in more knowledgeably than me, but I think that's where it kind of becomes a de facto reliance on IBC to set those height limits, because that's what's going to set the type of building, the construction type, and that's what's going to set the cost, right? So the reason stuff tops out at 85, 90 feet is because that's all you can do in terms of podium construction on wood. And so anything over that is going to be going to like steel and concrete or CLT or like heavy timber of some kind. And so I understand. That's why it's a complicated issue. I think you're right that it would be. I mean, it's hard for us to explain here, right? So obviously, it's hard to explain. But then the limiting factor becomes whether or not you're willing to switch construction types, which goes to a different cost, and then it becomes so it kind of it isn't so much like that we're pegging these heights and arbitrarily that's how high people are going to build to, because the costs peg us to kind of these ranges. I don't know. I don't know. It is hard to explain.
Certainly.
It seems like it's something that needs, I think what you were saying before, it just needs better study so that we don't just say 30 feet, you know, maybe, and that we understand the implications for the type of construction. So through the code type of construction, because that's what's driving a lot of what's going on now in terms of the, 4/2 or whatever it is, we're building 5/1 structures. That's the code is what's really driving that not more than the zoning, but as they need to be in balance.
Sounds like unless you're going to switch it to floors at this point.
Even if you do, there will still be implications for the code.
Right. And there are a lot of concerns about height is a thing that people can recognize and see and how it changes. So height limit seems like we got to have it. Anything else? Do you have any other questions?
I think that's helpful, and we'll
Okay.
do some more study on that and
Okay.
see what the implications are and look at options.
You might try to get the American Institute of Architects, the local chapter, to organize a little group that could talk about this, a small committee or something that could give a little bit more advice to people who actually deal with this every day. So,
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're doing another update on October 9th?
We are doing another public hearing on the 23rd, and then we may be coming back for an update, yes, on the 9th as
Okay.
well.
To
if
address
we're
the
able
things we
to,
just spoke.
Yeah, if we're able to compile that information within a week, we may need.
Thank you.
Maybe
2
that
weeks.
comes the 23rd.
Week. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate all of the public comments that we got today. Remember, the public comment period is still open, so any comments you make will be considered. And we have real professionals in the planning department who care and can give you good advice or answers or whatever. Okay, I feel like that's it. We're at the end of the agenda.